All right, so this afternoon we are going to learn how to use the Thor polyphonic synthesizer. Um, I should say polysonic, I think is exactly what they call it. But nevertheless, it's called the Thor, and it's a very, very powerful synthesizer. You can do a lot of things with it, and we're just going to scratch the surface today with what it can do. Um, Part of your projects are going to be to create an instrument using Thor, so a synthesizer of your very own. And so today's tutorial is going to walk us through creating a synthesizer using the Thor. So in your Blackboard drop box under the Thor tutorial, there should be a reason file. Um, and the reason file should be Thor synthesis groove. So let's go ahead and open that. All right. So now we have our Thor already connected to our mixer. Again, remember that there it shows up in our main mixer. Again, we're not going to worry too much about that. And right now I have a groove already created for you. Um, and it's on a loop. So when you hit play or either hit the space bar, you're going to hear this groove. And it's going to loop over and over again, all right? All right. So we've got that loop going, and um, we're going to learn sort of the tenets of Thor and what it has available to us, and how we can sort of modify this groove to make it something a little bit more interesting than what it is sonically. So, first of all, let's talk about a little bit about what this Thor is right here. So, we have polyphony. Now, polyphony means simply how many sounds I can make happen simultaneously. So right now the polyphony is set to 8. So I can only hit 8 keys on the MIDI controller at one time, and that's all you hear. So if I sort of put all of my hands down, it's only going to have 8 sounds that happen. If I were to set the polyphony higher, you can set it all the way up to 32, then I could, of course, you're going to get the gamut of that. Sorry about the loud noises. Right now, we can set it back down to 8, and that's all that we're really concerned with. Now, the release polyphony means that when I release the keys, 8 of the keys of the higher notes will decay. If you want more of the higher notes to sort of decay off, you would set that polyphony higher. So, for instance, let me go ahead and set the release on Thor a little bit higher, and you'll hear that if I play a chord and let go, notice that the top sort of frequencies decay a little bit slower, and that's called release polyphony. It just makes it sound a little bit more natural, as if you're going, if we were in a concert hall, the first frequencies to die off really would be the lower frequencies, and then what you'd be left with is the high frequencies. So this gives you control of how many of those higher frequencies you want to have remaining. I'm going to go ahead and set my release back down for the tutorial. All right. To open that area up where you can start controlling how you're going to make the sounds in Thor, again, you hit Show Programmer, and it'll show all of this information. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Right now, the keyboard is set to polyphonic. And that simply means that I can play multiple notes at a time. Okay. If I have it on mono re-triggered, it means no matter how legato I play on my MIDI controller, it's always going to sound like I re-triggered a note, but I won't be able to play a chord. Okay. All right. Now, if I have mono legato on, you'll be able to play legato. Okay. But again, I can't play a chord. So let's turn it back to polyphonic. Now, if I turn portamento on, portamento is pretty cool. What it does is, if I play a note and then I hold it and then I play another note, it's going to sort of glissando up to that note. If I play a higher note and go down, it'll gliss down to that note. If I play 2 notes at a time, it'll sort of do the glissando in the middle of those 2 notes playing. Okay? And if you do them really far apart, okay? And so with this portamento knob, you can change how quickly or slowly that portamento will happen. Okay, if you set the portamento high, it's going to take a long time for it to go. If you set the portamento low, it's going to go pretty quickly, okay, and be fairly unnoticeable. All right. If you set it to auto, whoops, we got to set the portamento up a little bit higher here. What that means is if you play 2 notes and you hold one, it's going to go up. But if you're just playing, separately, it won't do portamento. Okay. But it's pretty sensitive, so using auto again will allow you to play staccato and have that portamento glissando all at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the portamento off for today's tutorial. So go ahead and do that as well. Turn the portamento off. We'll learn more about these rotary buttons later. We don't want to know about that right now. And what this trigger does is, we're either going to trigger the Thor with MIDI information, meaning that when we play our MIDI controller, it's going to control the Thor, or we can set it up so that we can use a step sequencer. And there is a step sequencer located in the bottom of the Thor. And again, we're not going to use the step sequencer today, but later on we will learn how to use that inside of Thor, okay? Alright, so make sure that your polyphony says roughly around 8. Release polyphony is set around 8. Your MIDI is engaged, your step sequencer engaged, and your portamento is turned off. Alright. Oh, the other thing I didn't talk about is you have a pitch wheel and a mod wheel. And so when I hit a note, we can actually change the pitch, or we can change the modulation. Now, nothing is set up to the modulation, but later we can set something to that modulation wheel. And you can also use the wheels on your MIDI controller. One says pitch and the other says modulation on those Yamaha SO8s that we have. Okay, and I'm sorry I don't have 2 cameras to show you what I'm playing over here with my hands on my MIDI controller, but I think for this tutorial that'll be okay. So, we have this loop, and we have a bunch of stuff right here, and I don't want you to get too overwhelmed by this device, okay? What we have over here are 3 oscillators. Oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 3, and I can leave this off here so you can see that, okay. Now if there's no oscillators, we are going to hear no sound. I'm over here playing my MIDI controller. There is no sound coming out at all because there is nothing to make the sound. An oscillator is simply an electronic device that makes sound, okay? And so there's different types of oscillators that we have available to us within the Thor. We have the analog, the wavetable, phase modulation, the FM pair, the multi-oscillator, and the noise oscillator. We'll learn more about the synthesis and what they mean. Mostly with today's tutorial, what I want you to do is just kind of play around with it, okay? I do want you to build this synthesizer with me along with the tutorial, but later, after the tutorial's over, I kind of want you to take some time and just begin to play with it and see what we have. Okay, so down here the groove is set to 4/4 and the tempo is at 140. And so again, the groove sounds something like this. Let me go ahead and load in our analog analog oscillator, and here's the groove one more time. Okay, so we've got our little groove looped and ready to go. Now, so the first thing we want to do is we're gonna make the sound a little bit different than what we have just loaded in. All right, I'm going to use 3 different oscillators to change the sound of the synthesizer. Okay, so the first, you'll notice that I can click these different waveforms. Now the first waveform is the sawtooth, and then we have the square. And what's great about the square is that we have this sort of pitch wheel modulation where we can sort of pitch width, I should say, and we can change the width of the pitch, and this is based on the overtone series, and I won't go over into the details on that. I can give you some resources where we can discuss that stuff, okay? But you'll notice that if I play the groove with just the sawtooth, it sounds like that. If I play it with the pitch modulation, the square, I can also change how it sounds by changing the pitch width. Okay. There's also a triangle. And then there's a sine. And the interesting thing about the sine wave is that it has no harmonics, it's no overtones, it's just the fundamental. This is sort of what you would hear if you had a hearing test. They would put those things on your ears and you'd raise your hands when you heard certain frequencies. So this is what the sine wave sounds like. Okay. So those are our different analog wave forms that we have to deal with. We can also change things like the octave. Okay. Okay, we can change the sort of oscillation. We can change the semitones. Okay. Or we can detune it. And if you set that to 0, it's just in tune. Okay. So there's lots of things we can do with these oscillators already to change the way things sound. Alright? So for my groove that I'm going to create, I want my analog set to the square, and I want my pitch width to roughly be around 5. Actually, I want to beef it up to about 50. Alright. Okay. Now, it doesn't need to necessarily be exact. Now, the next oscillator I'm going to add is called a wavetable. Okay. And the wavetable I'm going to choose by clicking on where it says basic analog. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go down to where it says fixed signs. Alright? Now, and I'm going to have this position to be about 53 is where I want it. Now, I won't hear this second oscillator unless I engage this second oscillator filter to enable, okay? So, if I don't have these engaged, I won't hear them. So now the sound sounds like this. Okay, now I'm going to add a third oscillator. And the third oscillator, I'm going to add a multi-oscillator, alright? And I'm going to leave it at random, but I am going to detune this a little bit, and I'm going to turn it up to about 40. Roughly 40. Again, it's a little hard to sort of dial in exactly what you want. But again, when we're doing this, we're generally using our ears to create a sound that we like. Oh, and remember, I don't have it engaged, so here it is engaged. And I can mix and match. Okay, there's just the multi-oscillator. Here's the multi-oscillator and the wavetable. Here's the multi-oscillator and the analog. And again, there's all three together. Notice these arrows right here. This tells us where things go. So I can actually change the balance too. I can change the balance of oscillators 1 and 2 by using this mixer wheel, and also I can turn the levels up and down. Okay. Right now I'm just going to keep them both even and equal. Alright, now let's talk about filters. So this first filter, what I'm looking for is I'm going to use a state variable filter. Alright, and I'm going to set it to BP12. And what this is going to do is it's going to take out certain frequencies or beef up other frequencies, essentially. Okay, so we're going to talk about the frequencies, and right now the frequencies that I'm interested in are about down to about 40 hertz. Alright. Bring it down to about 175 hertz. And my resonant amount to about 40. Okay? Let me turn my volume up again. Notice that it got considerably softer when I filtered it. And you'll notice that as we start to filter the sounds, some things will get softer, and so we can end up boosting sound at the end if we like. And you guitar players have noticed that this happens when you start adding lots of effects to your guitars, that sometimes you'll lose volume, and so you actually have to turn up the gain at the end. Alright, so right now we're losing volume because we're filtering out frequencies. I can add another filter to this if I'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and push this shaper to filter. Okay, I'm going to turn my shaper on to a soft clip. And then I'm going to move this shaper filter and click on this arrow. And this arrow tells us that we're traveling all the way down to here. And I want only oscillator 1 to go into this shaper filter. And what I'm going to use is the comb filter. Oops, excuse me, not the comb filter. I'm going to use the formant filter. Alright, so let's back up here, and I remembered that I wanted to change my frequencies so that it was about 106 and my resonance was about 48. (46, 48). There we go. Okay. Oh, my formant filter. Let's go ahead and play. Uh-oh. I'm not hearing anything. Why am I not hearing anything? Oh, because it's not going to the amplifier. Okay. I have to remember that these arrows matter, and so if I send things down into the formant filter, then I need to make sure that I also engage filter to amplifier. Okay? And this is also where we can change the gain of things, or the level that we're going to... remember how I said we lost volume, and so this is where we can make up volume after we've lost sound. So, again, I'm going to go ahead and play this, and notice I can change how this sounds by moving this guy around. It's kind of cool, huh? And so what I'm looking for is about my XY to be about 29 and 48. Okay. And I'm going to turn my gender down a little bit too, to about 36. That's going to make it a little bit lower. And my drive, I'm going to keep it 64. But again, if we turn the drive up, it's going to turn the filter up. How much is getting filtered? Okay, so far so good. Starting to sound pretty cool. I kind of like that little groove with that filter. Alright, so now we can add effects to this stuff, and we have delay and chorus built in. Alright, so let's add a little bit of delay to this and see what happens. So you need to engage delay, and for our delay time, well, let's just play with it. I kind of like that. It gives it a little bit of a reverb sound. I'm going to set my feedback to about 38. And then any of this modulation, I'm going to set the amount to 78. Again, it doesn't need to necessarily be exact. And the dryer wetness, I'm going to set to 70. And we can make all sorts of strange things happen. Again, just setting it to a low level so that I'm not getting too much delay to alter the groove. But what this is doing is now it's kind of thickening it up. You notice how it got thicker? Okay. We could certainly add chorus to it if we wanted to. Okay. Okay. I'm going to turn the chorus off. All right. Another thing that we need to talk about is this amp envelope, which is always going to be engaged. And so there's three formants of sound. There's the four formants of the sound. There's the attack, which is when you hit the MIDI controller, that's the attack. And so you can have a quick attack by turning it all the way down. So if I hit the MIDI controller, you're just going to get the attack right on. Now, if I set this high, it's going to swell in. If I hit the MIDI controller and hold on to the key, it's going to swell in. Okay? So then there is the initial decay. So after you attack, there's always an initial decay, and you can set sort of how much of a decay you're going to get. So if I set the decay, we have the decay set there. If I set it really high, it's going to take a long time. Notice that if I set the decay really low, you're not going to get much sound. Okay. Now, sustain means how long that note is going to sustain after you've sort of at that volume level. Okay? So decay and sustain are related. Okay. And release is simply how long it takes for that sound to turn off after you lift up the key on the MIDI controller. So if I set that release high, it's going to sound like... Okay. So if I set the envelope sustain a little bit lower and the release a little bit lower, it's sort of going to have this nice sort of falling. Okay. Now, again, I want a quick release for this groove, so I'm going to set up my amp envelope. Okay. So now we have all of this stuff down here. And so we can begin to route things using this routing section within the Thor. And one of the things that I like to do is sort of use a low frequency oscillator to oscillate the sound. And you can make things like wobble, or in a lot of dubstep you can hear like woo, 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 woo effects happening. And that's what they're doing. They're using low frequency oscillators. All right. So go ahead and in your source, we're going to go ahead and set up LFO oscillator 1. Okay. And our destination is going to be pitch. And engage in LFO1 the key sync and tempo sync button. Now we need to change the meow. Okay. Notice that we can begin to change some strange stuff. Now we sent it to an oscillator. Let's actually send it to LFO1. Okay. Okay. Notice we're altering the sound quite a bit. So, if we want it to just change a little bit of the sound, we're going to change our amount to a pretty low rate. If we want it to change it a lot, the destination amount at 100%, then pretty much all we're going to hear is all of the sound affected by the LFO. Okay? And how much that oscillator is going to oscillate, the FM oscillator, is going to be affected by this amount as well. Okay? Let's, instead of doing oscillator 1, let's actually do pitch itself. Okay? So now we're going to alter the pitch. And I'm going to set my amount to about 44. That'll be 46 is fine. And then my pitch, about 41. Alright. And you'll notice that I can then change my rate, and I can do it to a tempo, or I can do it by hertz. Usually if I'm working with something rhythmic, I'm going to use my LFO to sync to the tempo. And that way it's always going to sort of wobble in time instead of wobbling randomly. Okay? So I had mine set to, I think it was an 8th note when I made this earlier. There we go. Now delay simply means how many milliseconds you want this LFO to turn on. So you can have it so it turns on after the initial attack. Okay, so if you set it really high, you're not going to hear anything because this is sort of a groove with a short short note value. So if you were actually holding like a chord out, you could have this LFO kick in a little bit after the chord was holding. So see how that works. All right. So I'm not going to have any delay on this. We can also change the type of waveform that we have in our LFO. That's sort of a random there. Now, these types of swells, again, are only going to work really well if you have something held out. Okay. And these are ladders. Okay. So there's 16 different types. I'm going to go back to something like if I turn the delay off, it's a little bit clearer. We can also change different filters. We can start to send it to, again, we can change the pitch frequency. We can change the oscillation amount. We can turn this to a pitch wheel so that we can then alter the pitch wheel, and it will start to change the rate of the LFO, so on and so forth. And we will mess with this a lot in the future because we can start adding different formats. Again, I can add, say, I can send this to LFO2. And LFO2 is located over here. And we can oscillate maybe the FM frequency. Okay, so you can see that it can kind of be you can kind of get enthralled with that. So essentially, that's the basic tenets of what the Thor can do. So what I want you to do now is just go ahead and play around with it and clear out the Thor patch simply by going delete devices and tracks, delete all in group, and go back and go to Instruments, Thor Polyphonic Synthesizer, and start programming away and see what you can come up with. And what I want you to do is save a synthesizer, and when I come back, I would love to hear the synthesizer that you have made. And again, you're going to have to make a synthesizer for your project. So um, that's the tutorial on the Thor Polysonic Synthesizer, and we will again get into more detail. We could probably spend a whole semester on the Thor, but it's a very, very powerful instrument and really fun to play with. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do.